All right. All right. So we are back from our break, and we want to continue along um, with the discussion of the analysis activities. Okay, so we just talked about the feasibility study. We kind of went into some details of different aspects of it. And we now want to talk about requirements stage, the requirement gathering, right? Which is the bulk of the analysis section. And the purpose of doing requirements gathering is so that we can create a requirement specification, okay? Which tells essentially our functional requirements and our non-functional requirements, which we will discuss near the end of class. All right, so we're going towards the functional and the non-functional requirements. So we have the requirement gathering section, and once your feasibility report is positive in terms of pursuing the project, then the next phase starts with gathering requirements from the user, because the analysts really need to be able to understand what they are getting into to be able to build a system that is going to meet the needs of the client. Um, Whether or not it is a new system or an existing system that they want to improve, right? We still need to gather requirements for it. It's just we'll have different things that will be done in terms of getting these requirements. So we have the software requirement specification being developed. We take those requirements from various stakeholders. We want to see how the intended software will interact with hardware, different interfaces, response times, portability. We want to understand how this software is going to operate, right? What are our security intentions, right? What will be the limitations of the system? And your software requirement specification should have user requirements that are expressed in natural language. We have technical requirements in structured language, which is used inside the organization for the persons who are to be interacting with the system on a technical level. Okay, we'll have design descriptions that are written in pseudocode. You want to maybe have mock-up of forms and GUIs for basically like a blueprint of, or like a visual of how the system should look and feel. And then we have, of course, things like mathematical and conditional notations for things like VFDs, etc. Don't worry too much about this particular document. We at our level don't have to deal with developing anything like this at this point. Our goal really and truly is to be able to just list the functional and non-functional requirements, right? Through, and we will see it through doing some investigative techniques. So we'll have the requirements validation, right? Again, this is not a document that we are going to produce, but let's just talk about it, see it, right? So your requirements could be checked against the following conditions. This is once your requirements are collected, right? You want to see if the requirements could be implemented in a practical manner. If the requirements are valid, okay, in terms of functionality, so does the requirements make sense? Or if anything is ambiguous, all right? So is it that when you collect all of the requirements for the system, is it such that we can't or we don't know exactly what exists in terms of what this user wants out of the system? If things are ambiguous after we do our requirements specification, then we have to go back and fix something. The requirement should be complete and be demonstratable, right? They could be demonstrated. So how do we get our requirements, right? How do we get the requirements? We have to discuss with the client and end users and know their expectations from the software. I think we kind of spoke about that last class. That in terms of collecting requirements, there must be discussion or some sort of means of understanding what the end users want. We didn't really use the word discussion for end users, right? But in terms of the client themselves, we identify that the interview is good for that. For understanding, well, where do the managers, the persons who are in charge of the system, what is their goal? What is their vision? What is their purpose for this system, right? In terms of understanding end users, maybe you will give out your questionnaires and you will get specific information from them in terms of what they expect from the system, how the system should work for them, especially if it's coming from or related to a system that already exists. So then we have organizing requirements, right? Your developers prioritize and arrange requirements in order of importance, urgency, and convenience. You negotiate and discuss if the requirements are ambiguous, as we identified before, or we have something to resolve, right? Or if there are some conflicts to resolve, then you have to negotiate with the stakeholders. You might have to say, okay, well, it might not be wise for the end users to actually have access to this part of the system, or something that the managers want would require for the people at the lower levels to be given a certain level of access that they also said that they didn't want the end users to get access, right? And you're going to have to work that through in terms of developing the system. And of course, you need to document. All right, you need to document all formal and informal, right? All functional and non-functional requirements need to be documented and made available. So, in terms of the techniques, we have different ways of being able to get all of these requirements that we require, that are needed for the system to be developed. So we spoke about some of these interviews. So this is where we say, and you could use some more of these here, right? Other than what we have here, but really and truly for our SBA, which I spoke about last class, your document that you come up with must have your interview report, it must have your observation report, and it must have a questionnaire report. And this means that you conducted the interview, questionnaires, and observation with members of the business or on the business itself, and you collected that data and you analyzed what was said, or you analyzed what was returned, so that you would be able to produce the report. The interview itself, the interview questions and the direct responses are not sufficient enough to put inside of the document. You need to analyze that. You need to convert that to something meaningful as it relates to the system. So in your interview report, you could quote. When you talk to somebody, when you talk to a manager, you talk to the owner of a business, you could quote what they said, but then you also still have to translate that quote. You have to translate that quote into something that is useful. Okay? So your interviews, it's a medium to collect your requirements. You have to do up some questions. You might have structured interviews where you have prepared questions beforehand, You might have non-structured interviews where you go in and you ask questions and you just let the flow of the conversation dictate what might be important for the organization. You might have semi-structured. You go in with questions, and those questions just lead to open discussion. Okay? So the interviews could be oral, written. So an interview, if it is that you said, okay, you met with the owner of the business via WhatsApp and you posed some questions via a WhatsApp chat and they typed their responses or they sent voice notes back. That's an interview, right? So it could be oral, it could be written, it could be one-to-one, it could be group. If it is that you decide that there's a company and you want to do an interview, a small company, and you want to do an interview with some of the key employees, you can have a group interview with them. If the company, however, have 25, 50 employees, you can't interview all of them. It would be better to do a survey or some questionnaires or something so, right? So you might want to conduct your surveys among your customers or among the bulk of your customers or the bulk of your employees, or send out some questionnaires where you could get some very specific information about the organization. But the shortcoming of that is if it is that an option is for some issue is not mentioned in the questionnaire, you might not get it. Right? So depending on how your questionnaire, the person creating the questionnaire has to try and think through everything. Or the questionnaire might have to have like a little open section to collect data on, because you might be thinking the issue might be one specific thing, whereas the issue is something that you didn't provide accommodation for being said. So in your questionnaire, when you develop a question, you might have to put what do you think is the greatest shortcoming of the system? And then you put the options. The system is too slow. The system doesn't have enough space. The system, the system is not, it's some other third option. And it's none of those for the person, because the person's main issue with the system is that they don't find that the system's user interface is intuitive enough. You're going to take that data, and you will analyze based on that data and still leave out. So it might be wise to always put in for a question like that some other issue and let the person put in what the issue is. Okay? So task analysis, this is kind of like our observation here, right? So your developers and engineers analyze the operation for which a new system is required. If the client already had some software to perform certain operations, it's studied and required. So you observe the current system in operation. And then you see where the shortcomings in this current system occur. And a system, even though they mentioned it here with software, a system does not have to be something that is, a system doesn't have to be something that is computerized. Everybody has a system. A system might involve their books, right? A system might involve the book. So a system does not have to be computerized. So you then go on and take what you saw from observing the system in operation over a period of time. And I do suggest to everyone that your observation period be no less than like a week. Okay, because you can't, I mean, you could go in a day and see things, but you really and truly want to give it a fair period of time to see the system in operation and to catch any errors, right? So you'll be watching over and over and over what this person doing for a period of time. Okay, so domain analysis, right? Every software falls into some domain category. The expert people in the domain could be a great help. So you might want to talk to some other people about the system. This could be additional to your questionnaire observation and interviews. Okay, this is optional now. Brainstorming is optional. Document analysis is optional. So you could do extra things if you want to, right? You could do extra things if you want to, but in terms of your analysis, all right, you could do a prototype and say, okay, well, we ask some of the persons in the organization, if the organization would allow for that, to work with the prototype. And we got feedback based on the prototype if you're taking a prototyping approach to solving the problem. All right. But because CAPE requires you to have a report on interview, observation, and questionnaires, you have to have it inside. Right? Okay, look the observation here as the last one. Okay, so you observe the working and install system, and you see the workflow, you see the problems as they exist, and you have, some conclusions drawn. Okay, we have software requirement characteristics. So your software requirement specification, when your requirement specification is complete, it should be clear. There should be no question about any recommendations in the software requirement characteristic or anything that was identified that should make anybody scratch their head. It needs to be correct, consistent, coherent, comprehensible. It must be modifiable. You should be able to change it, right? It should be verifiable. Okay, you could go back and you could look at the techniques that you used and you could see, okay, this recommendation or this requirement that was identified came up as a result of doing a direct observation for a period of a week where we saw these specific things come up as issues, and as a result, it is now recommended that the new system has this particular requirement. Okay, prioritize. Some requirements might be a little more important than others. So we have, if it is that you have your system and it's a school registration system, maybe some sort of management of club and club-based activities would hold less priority than actually holding data about students and classes and exam results. And this could all tie into, remember that whole concept of schedule and feasibility. So if it is that we have a software that we want to get for students, and it must have those two things, it must support club activities, and it must support students and grades and producing reports. And we come back and we say, okay, well, within this schedule given, it is now currently the month of May, maybe we want this by or before August has finished. It is not possible schedule-wise to give you quality software that will allow for all of these things to be inside there, but we could do it on a modular basis. We can make sure that the software is very good for collecting grades and for producing reports and for recording marks and for putting students into classes. And then afterwards, once we have that running, we can focus on putting in the support for clubs and club-based activities, etc. Okay, unambiguous again ties in with clear, traceable, really and truly ties in with verifiable, and you have your credible sources. So you need to be able to say, well, this is from these requirements were identified by providing a questionnaire to students who are currently enrolled, and also from parents of students, and also from the teachers of the school, right? Because you can't bring a software requirement characteristic for a school management system but you polled just normal working class people who may or may not have children in school. Are you all with me so far? Everybody understand? Everybody's
Yes, sir.
all right. Anybody have anything to contribute so far? No?
So I just have a quick question. For exams, you're asked us to like define all these terms.
Well, they might ask you what are the characteristics of a requirement specification. You can say, right, in terms of a requirement specification should be modifiable, right? Or it should provide some sort of priority for the different requirements on it. And you can just say what it is. So yeah, to an extent you have to be able to at least discuss this in the way that we have discussed this here, right? But they're not going to ask you for all of these. They might just ask you what is a requirement specification, and you are going to be able to say a requirement specification is the document produced at the end of performing fact-finding techniques on a business to identify what should be the functional and non-functional requirements of an organization's new system, right? It should be verifiable, modifiable, and prioritized. And it should be very clear in terms of the items on that. The requirements identified for the system. Okay? But we will get time to practice our responses to this. And so don't panic about exams just yet. We're still pretty early inside here. Let's just, focus on understanding. So we want to talk about the requirements themselves, right? And we have two categories of requirements. We have functional requirements and we have non-functional requirements. So our functional requirements are related to how the software operates, what the software is intended to do, right? So they define the actual functions and functionality within the software system. So you could look at your program and look at what your program has in it, and those typically are the functional requirements. Your program should be able to read a file and store the contents of that file into a data structure that is searchable, so that persons can view the data that was in the file based upon a keyword search, right? The user should be able to add new information to the software. The user should be able to edit and delete information from the software. Okay? So according to the business rules and the functions of the actual organization, this is what your functional requirements are. And do not, let me let you all know something. Do not think that because the name says functional requirements and non-functional requirements, don't think that it makes you think that functional requirements are more important than non-functional requirements. There are two categories, but they are equally as important, functional and non-functional. So a non-functional requirement can make somebody not want to use your software. Okay? So what is a non-functional requirement? Non-functional requirement refers to the aspects of the software that more give it some sort of value, right? They're the characteristics of the software. So your non-functional software include things like security and login. In terms of storing, how much storage capacity it have, the way that the cost of the software, the portability of the software, can the software work with different file formats, the interface of the software. This doesn't have anything to do with the business rules, but if it is that your software is unusable, think of when I go on my rant about Windows 8. Now, functionally, Windows 8 is not different from Windows 7 or Windows 10. It does what it has to do as an operating system. It checks all the functional requirements. But non-functional requirement a non-functional requirement prevented me from using Windows 8. And that is, I just could not wrap my head around the interface. Okay? So you see how important a non-functional requirement was when it came to acceptance of a user for that particular system. All right? Maybe it is a non-functional requirement. I've heard before. I don't know if they've changed it up to now, but Windows XP was very, very important to the US military, because at the time when the US military was running along the, computerizing their systems, Windows XP met a lot of their needs, and a lot of the software that they use to this day was Windows XP specific. So even when Windows 7 and Windows 8 and stuff come out, the American military did not adopt that, but the American military actually has now its own branch of operating systems that they work with Microsoft to develop that continues along the branch of Windows XP, because of the fact that a lot of their software was written for compatibility with Windows XP. And once things moved away and changed in Windows 7, Windows 8, they wanted to still use their systems, and they couldn't afford to have the software written over. So it was easier for them to have the operating system evolve in such a way that it was useful for them, right? So in terms of a non-functional requirement, right, and even maybe in terms of some of the functional requirements, that is where the American military had to go with the development of its operating systems. Okay, as I say, I can't remember. I don't know if they've changed over and stuff like that. But for a lot of their critical systems, Windows XP was the best operating system that they had. Right? So your requirements could be categorized logically as must have. What are the requirements that this system must have? You cannot, the user cannot accept the software without these particular requirements. Okay? Then we have should have. It would be nice to have this, right? I mean, if it's included, then that makes us more likely to accept when the software is presented. Then we have could have. Okay, the software can, function with or without it. Nice. And then you have a wish list. Okay, we don't have anything else. I wish we think that the top of the top menu bar in every window should be green. That's just how our company wants the software, but it's not going to break the software if it don't have it. It would be nice. Okay, so we could put our requirements into these. But you see, once the system cannot be accepted, right, without at least these set of things being accepted, and maybe most of these. Okay, so this is the where's my pen? Right, this is the minimum acceptable stuff for us to say, yes. Once we have what is in green, yes. If something that is in black is not existing, then no, I don't want it at all. Okay, we don't want it at all. So right. This user interface requirements, I think you all could read that on your own, and the software metrics and stuff. We don't really have to go into too much about it. So we've pretty much covered what is required for the analysis section. right? So your user interface requirements. This is I would say should read. Okay, so give this a should read, and you know, the rest of this chapter you could read it if you are interested, but it's not mandatory. Okay, so that's it. Any questions? I'm gonna stop the recording now.